Hello everyone, I'm George from Ireland. This video is about how a man has been sacked at Eton for broadcasting a video which questioned radical feminism. And this is part of the broader debate about toxic masculinity, intersectionality, and similar theories. So Mr. Noland was teaching at Eton for several years. By all accounts, he was outstanding, but then he committed the cardinal error of questioning one of the modern liberal left pieties. So it was a lecture he prepared for boys in their last 2 years at the £43,000 a year Berkshire School for Toffs. And Mr. Noland never actually delivered it to the boys. He was informed not to. This video was made. He published it. He was instructed not to take it down a number of times. Apparently, he refused point blank, and eventually he was sacked for that. It was held to be gross misconduct. So I don't propose to praise the whole lecture. You'd have to see it. I might put a link below, but it's a superb one. Even if you completely disagree with the gravamen of it, it's very well put together, lucidly explained, and well sourced with many citations from articles in learned journals. So it's a very erudite chap. It's delivered in an engaging manner. So intersectionality, obviously, is the belief that, say, gender overlaps with ethnicity and social class and so on, and you can be discriminated for more than one thing. Let's say Kamala Harris, she could said to be suffer discrimination for being a woman, for being partly black, for being partly Indian, maybe other things. Whatever her social class was when she started out, actually kind of upper middle class, so probably not. Anyway, there's also this idea that it's a man's world, that a lot of masculinity is negative. It is about brutalizing people, and is a wrong way to think. Moreover, there's the notion that sex doesn't really exist, and Mr. Nolan took issue with this. The idea that it's a social construct. You're simply conditioned into having your gender, or that gender and sex are not quite the same. You may have heard of The Second Sex by Simone de Beauvoir, the celebrated French feminist, which she published just after the Second World War. And she said, one is not born a woman, one becomes one. Well, strictly speaking, that's true, because girls are girls. They are infants, first of all. They become kind of real girls, into teenage girls, into full women sometime in their late teens. But that's not what she was driving at, as in being female. And she suggests it's sort of societal conditioning. There's this full spectrum propagandizing of women into gender roles, and indeed men into gender roles, and that male and female brains are very different. I have seen a TED talk by a brain scientist, and she maintains that male and female brains are virtually identical. Now, I don't know anything about brain science, so I'll just take her word for it. But anyway, this talk by Mr. Dillard, it wasn't too polemical, and I thought it gave a fair hearing to the radical feminist viewpoint. Now, you might think that Mr. Nolan's talk is bunkum, but I think any unbiased observer would have to acknowledge that it's well composed, it's thought-provoking, and it's worth hearing. You should sometimes force yourself to listen to views that you find distasteful. Otherwise, you're stuck in an echo chamber. So you can't be sure that your views are right or wrong till you look at others. I think it was Thomas Hobbes in Areopagitaka. I can't pronounce it. Anyway, that 17th century text, he was opposed to censorship, saying in order to know what bad ideas are or good ideas are, we must see the difference. We must hear both. We must read them. And who's to say what's true and what's not? But sadly, we're entering an increasingly censorious time. So this is the intolerant zeitgeist. Now, I remember when I was a little boy reading about Socrates saying, question everything. And that really stayed with me. Don't take things on trust. Do your own research, find things out, ask why, have some healthy skepticism about what you're told. Don't simply accept it's holy writ because it comes from an authority figure. I must believe it. The argument from authority is so often abused. Okay, you can't question me because I am the teacher, the professor, the police officer, the judge, the politician, the person with wealth, power, status behind me with letters to my name. Now, I know in certain issues, certain areas, so it really is a matter of knowledge, and like, what would I know compared to a doctor about medicine? But there are things where it's not quite so clear cut, and there can be a spirited debate in academia. Academia is supposed to be objective, there's supposed to be academic freedom, but that's increasingly under threat, academic freedom, jeopardizing by the ferocious intolerance of some of the liberal left. And of course, there have been intolerant right-wingers in the past. Don't think there are particularly now. But no platforming is the modern hemlock. This could spell doom for the Socratic method of being doubtful about everything, demanding proof. So we really dull our ability to engage in ratiocination if we're not going to question things and demand an evidentiary basis for any of these claims. So some of these feminist shibboleths are not buttressed by much hard evidence. That's what Mr. Nolan says, and indeed there's plenty of countervailing evidence. So he slaughtered a number of sacred cows, and the notion that some opinions are unopposable should strike terror into the heart of anyone who cares about academic freedom. The notion that we've had this miseducation for centuries, millennia, into gender roles. And all right, sometimes gender roles were too rigid. I mean, if a man wants to dress as a woman or vice versa, I'm not saying they shouldn't be permitted to. If a man wants to be a house husband and a wife wants to be a breadwinner, I'm not telling them they're wrong to do that, and it's not completely novel. But the intolerance of those who question radical feminism is something that's worrying. So no viewpoint should be unquestionable, even viewpoints that I share, which I think are, well, morally upstanding, such as anti-racism. But we've reached this new stage of liberal totalitarianism. It's non-violent totalitarianism. It doesn't involve jailing people, well, very seldom, but it involves really smothering free thought. There's this airlessness entering academia and schooling. And some of these shock troops of the politically correct movement have a frightening sense of their own rectitude. It's a quasi-religious thing, so it's taken on this cultish aspect. It's a closed system of thought because it brooks no dissent, and there's a moral authoritarianism behind it, such as you used to find in sort of faith-based intolerance. They want to quash all questioners. Their opinions are advanced with fanaticism, and they simply shout down people who question them. These are foam-flecked, swivel-eyed zealots. And then they label things extremist. Even if they are extremist, we should hear them. Precisely because they're outside the mainstream, they ought to be given a hearing. I remind you what Barry Goldwater said, not a politician I agree with on much, who said that extremism in the defense of liberty is no vice, and moderation in pursuit of justice is no virtue. What if you're extremely right, extremely moral, extremely honest, and so on, extremely committed to freedom? Surely these things are laudable. Many mainstream views, such as anti-racialism or gender equality, the abolition of servitude and so forth, were not so long ago regarded as extreme. So anyway, Mr. Nolan's publication and refusal to take down this video was held to be gross misconduct, and he was summarily dismissed. Now the headmaster of Eton is Simon Henderson, and this old Wickham-ist been Magister Informator of Eton for about 5 years. Another thing is he's a relatively young man in his early 40s. He's known as trendy, handy by some, trying to decolonise the curriculum and so forth. Very on board with the BLM movement. I mean, I have some sympathies towards BLM too. Now, Lord Waldegrave is the Provost of Eton, as in he's the live-in head of the Board of Governors, a superannuated Conservative politician, descendant of Lord Waldegrave, who's the second shortest serving Prime Minister in British history. In the 1850s, his ancestor was Prime Minister for a mere 5 days. This Lord Waldegrave, he went to Eton and Corpus Christi College, Oxford, president of the Oxford Union, an absolutely stellar CV, and he was a Conservative cabinet minister, talked about as a Prime Minister in the 90s, but he lost his seat in 1997 and decided not to contest it again. He bowed out of politics and been Provost of Eton ever since. So it's a most agreeable berth as a retirement job. But he said he shan't be intervening. He's published his reasons, saying, I don't think he's ever intervened in a disciplinary matter involving the staff. Should the talk have been published or not, that's debatable. But if you're ordered by the headmaster to take it down and you persistently refuse, and you know that the penalty is sacking, then you've got to go. I have to say, I actually do agree on this one. I mean, I think the talk should have gone ahead, and I don't think he should have been asked to take it down. But if you're told several times you've got to take it down, then I think you need to do that. Anyway, so Charles Moore, the editor of the Daily Telegraph, former editor, and he said the very same thing. He's an Eldertonian too. A very conservative chap, though his family was involved in the Liberal Party in the 70s. Gavin Williamson, the Education Secretary, has just weighed in and all of a sudden said that Eton ought to take girls. Wow, what prompted this intervention? I mean, I think he should have kept stum on this. I've never heard an Education Secretary say that any school should change its gender policy, allowing girls in, allowing boys in, going mixed, not being mixed. Only Eton gets this because of this row. I thought it was unseemly. It's inapposite for him to weigh in on a completely internal matter for an independent school, and that's another bugbear of mine. The so-called independent sector is less and less independent. The government has arrogated to itself ever more control of the independent sector. Having largely screwed up the state sector, they're determined to wreak merry hell with the independent sector. So Eton is a four-letter word, and be very objectionable for many if this talk had not been challenged. Well, they could have had another talk to put the other point of view, which would be allowed to play devil's advocate. So it was, anyway, an enthralling video, and I urge you to read this video critiquing feminism. It was educative, it was carefully worded, it wasn't crass, and it's led to him being sacked. So the man, he took issue with the notion of the patriarchy, that we're a phallocratic society, and male mastery means that women don't get to the top so much in all sorts of professions and control almost every legislature in the world and are the majority of judges, on and on and on, and they frame laws to suit men, and women earn less money. But he said, explain to me why disproportionately men are in prison. Something like 95% of people in jail are in prison, or that male life expectancy is lower in every developed country, that the male suicide rate is higher, that male educational failure is higher, that unemployment amongst males is higher, and on and on and on. You talk about these rewards for men. You don't talk about the sacrifices men work, on average, doing more stressful jobs, more difficult jobs, and all the rest of it. So he also observed that the differences between male and female are deeply rooted in biology, and you can see the division of roles in almost every species. And even if there is a societal formation of gender roles, why is it in virtually every culture, in virtually every epoch, it's been broadly the same? And the two genders have somewhat synthesized in their roles in the 20th century in highly technologically advanced countries. So different stereotypically masculine and feminine behavior is not entirely down to societal conditioning. It arises from our genes. That's what he's arguing. But anyway, it's flabbergasting that Eton, of all places, a teacher should not be permitted to educate the pupils. So I thought the talk was very well supported with all sorts of quotations from academics and academic studies you could dip into. So the claim that patriarchy is a specialist theory is surely one that's worth considering. Perhaps this claim is dead wrong, but it ought to be simply examined. It's invaluable to challenge your beliefs and to question orthodoxies and modern pieties. You might end up merely confirming your preconceived beliefs, but at least you've been willing to question them. So I think you should give an alternative viewpoint a chance. And we've come to a pretty pass when pupils are not allowed to be exposed to a just slightly contentious viewpoint, a viewpoint which only a few years ago wouldn't have been remotely controversial. So what are we trying to accomplish with education? Surely it's not force-feeding facts. Are we modern Mr. Gradgrinds? Isn't it encouraging critical thinking and exposing them to several different viewpoints, and then they make up their own mind, rather than being just rammed full of propaganda for a certain cause? So as I say, these people, these radical feminists, would approach with a missionary zeal, and they would like to really indoctrinate people. We ought to be interested in teaching, not preaching. And these preachments of feminists, of anti-imperialists, of the so-called, or the race industry, they have reached this gospel status in which they can't be doubted. So anyway, we shouldn't be obliging them to simply repeat liberal left talking points. And the notion that society, particularly Western one, is one vast crime against the masses is troubling. So the world as it is, and the West, in that vague but comprehensible term, ought to be vigorously scrutinized, robustly criticized, but we should also be allowed to stridently speak in its defense, to try and vindicate the notion that we actually have gender equality, certainly in highly advanced countries. Anyway, so the one most famous thing that Voltaire never said comes into play. I disagree with what you say, but I defend to the death your right to say it. And that's crucial. It's worrying that free speech is being encroached on so seriously that this acceptable spectrum of debate is narrowing. So there's an ever shrinking ideological range in which people are allowed to express their opinions, all shades of the same colour. Do we believe in freedom of speech or not? This was not hate speech. This was not incitement to racial hatred or gender hatred. It was simply a critical analysis of radical feminist theory. Anyway, it wasn't anything impermissible. So this pedagogue did his best to put an alternative viewpoint to his pupils. It was a different way of thinking. Surely it was worthy, at least, of consideration. So the United Kingdom and the West are in the grip of this new, increasingly tolerant and sanctimonious radical feminist movement. And it links up with the race industry and so on, and the politically correct movement generally. And it doesn't consist of labour camps or torture chambers or killing fields, no. But it does involve sacking, no platforming, safe spaces, trigger warnings, censoring the curriculum, and so on. And that troubles me. I think it ought to perturb you as well. So it's distressingly reminiscent of what went on in the early stages of totalitarianism. And I'm not saying that we're going to get to the violent stage. No, I don't think so. But we are going down a dangerous road, and this is a retrograde step. How long is it to their book burnings? Already certain books are taken out of libraries, and it smacks of a staggering arrogance to suggest that your views are so intellectually unassailable that they are above examination. Surely nothing is above scrutiny. Anyway, if you really are so supremely confident that your views can be not disproven or unfalsifiable, then surely you should welcome any examination thereof. No views are really beyond refutation, are they? Anyway, you ought to welcome every attack against them. I mean, I'm against Holocaust denials laws, for instance, even though I know the Holocaust existed. I mean, it's not a matter of opinion. And I know you'll always have people who are frankly stupid who will fall for Holocaust denialism. But to have your beliefs questioned exercises the mind. It elasticates our intellects. To be thwarted makes people strive to reappraise their beliefs, and they articulate their beliefs afresh with greater lucidity. So we should make people stand up to the sort of exercise that is required of examining beliefs, having to defend beliefs, even express beliefs that you don't share in a debate and things like that. So how on earth would we ever change our minds if we weren't to hear an alternative point of view? So many beliefs are dubbed extremism, as I already said. Anyway, some people are possessed by this worrying moral certitude as to their beliefs. So these closed-minded people, they imperil academic freedom. Let 1,000 schools of thought contend.